So, Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about helmets. Now, this was on my mind the other day because one of my colleagues rides a bike to work, but he doesn't wear a helmet. And, um, it's a free country. As far as I'm concerned, you can do what you want. But I've been a cyclist for years, and I've always worn a helmet. And um, I guess I'm kind of wondering why wouldn't someone do that? So, I've been thinking about it. And, you know, being a cyclist for the better part of 2 decades or more, I've accumulated a lot of information, both in terms of personal experience and things I've seen on the road, things I've seen in the woods, whether I'm riding on the street or riding mountain biking. And I've also made it a point to keep abreast of things in the news. So I have several folders on various issues. I print out and save news articles that I think might be relevant. Everything from political issues like foreign policy, taxes, gun control, healthcare, to cycling related issues. And in fact, I have two large folders of news articles related to cycling. They're this thick. And I remember one in particular. There was a columnist in Tucson, Arizona, who did an article where he went on a rant about cyclists. And it started off fairly mundane. He was describing an altercation he had with a cyclist that appeared to have passed him unsafely while he was turning. Now, he never said whether he actually signaled his turn or whether the turn signal was visible. If you can imagine cars close together in traffic, um, the signal might have been blocked by the car behind him or something to a cyclist overtaking from the side. And just as likely, he might not have signaled his turn. He never said, I signaled my turn. He just said, I was turning and this guy appeared to try to pass me and we got in an altercation. Now, people get in altercations on the road whenever you have, thousands or perhaps even millions of people all going this way and that. There's going to be confrontations. Someone's going to do something stupid, or there's just going to be a random occurrence, an actual accident, in other words, not something that's attributable to negligence on one party or the other. I find it kind of disconcerting that we refer to all crashes or all roadway incidents as accidents unless they're deliberate, attacks like a road rage, because most of what we actually consider accidents aren't accidental in all. A lot of them are actually attributable to operator error, somebody doing something wrong, somebody making a conscious choice to disregard a rule, etc. Um, so anyway, give the guy the benefit of the doubt and assume he actually encountered a cyclist who was a jerk rather than that he didn't signal his turn, which, to be fair, a lot of drivers don't. And it's usually not like, oh, that one time they forgot. Because I don't know about you, when I drive, I always signal my turns as a rule. It's just ingrained. It's what I do. It's like zipping up your shorts after going to the bathroom. You don't have to think about it. And if you make it something that you always do, then you don't have to sit there and try to remember each time. I'm not perfect. There may have been times in the past where I did not, in fact, signal a turn. But generally speaking, as a rule, since I don't have to make a conscious effort to think about it, because at this point it is an ingrained thing. It's part of making the turn, just like making sure the way is clear, making sure that you're not going to hit anybody, making sure you're allowed to turn there, etc. There's not signage prohibiting it. Part of that is also signaling the turn before you actually slow down and alter course or alter speed. A lot of people just don't do this, and I think it's just because they have a learned behavior where they never learned how to do it the right way. For some of them, it might be they're distracted, they got a cell phone, they're doing their hair, whatever. But I think for a lot of people, it's just they never bothered to learn how to do it the right way. And I think for a lot of them, that's because they never had a reason to. They're not likely to get pulled over for it, and they just don't see, the danger there. Whereas, if you're, for example, a cyclist who's been hit by a car, uh, as I have, you can clearly, okay, there's a danger here. I'm not going to want to, risk injuring somebody else by making an unexpected, unsignaled turn, because I know what it's like to get hit by a car, and it's not fun. If you're not a cyclist or a motorcyclist or somebody who's ever been in that situation where you were nearly hit by a car or hit by a car, you're not even going to be cognizant of that as a thing, as a danger. So, I mean, as an abstract thing, you might realize that if you hit somebody with your car, they could be hurt, but it doesn't have that same. It's not as viscerally real as it is if you've actually been hit by a car and thrown 10 feet through the air. Just the way it is. So for whatever reason, a lot of people don't signal turn. So since he doesn't specifically say, he doesn't say like, I made a clearly signaled turn with plenty of warning and the cyclist cut me off. He just says the cyclist appeared to try and pass me while I was turning. It's ambiguous. It could be he didn't signal the turn. It could be the cyclist was being a dick. But let's give this guy the benefit of the doubt and assume he did in fact have a run-in with a rude cyclist who was, who knew the guy was turning, had seen a signal, and decided to try and pass him anyway. Now, I guess the question becomes, why would you do that? Because, in that case, it's not just a question of you're breaking a traffic rule, i.e. passing a turning car on the inside of its turn, which you're not supposed to do. You're also putting your life at mortal risk, So why would somebody take that chance? The argument that, well, he had clearly signaled his turn, and then the cyclist just blew by him. Why would anyone do that? For example, I've actually had people explain to me why they run stop signs. I've talked to several people, and one of them said, well, if I can see nobody's coming, it's still wrong and it's still illegal, but you're like, well, okay, he's trying to rationalize it. It's still not something he should be doing. But if he can see that nobody's coming, in his mind, there's no danger. Now, of course, the danger is if somebody is coming and you don't happen to see them for whatever reason, they have no knowledge that you're going to be coming because they know there's a stop sign there and they don't expect people to be running. So I'm not saying people should run stop signs. Obviously, it's stupid, it's illegal, it's, But the point is, if somebody explains they're running a stop sign because they can see nobody's coming, I can see how they're trying to rationalize it. It's still wrong, but I can see how they're trying to rationalize it. However, if you're going to make the opposite argument, what if you said, well, you can see somebody's coming and you just run the stop sign anyway? Because why? Because you want to get in a collision? Running a stop sign is bad per se, regardless, but if you're going to do it when you know somebody's coming, that's even worse. And it's one of those things where, it sort of flies in the face of the opposite statement, which is the rationalization usually presented. I've talked to several people who've said they run stop signs, and all of them say, well, if I can see nobody's coming, the way is clear. Again, I'm not condoning that, but okay, their logic, it's still illegal, but their logic is that nobody's coming. However, what this guy who wrote the editorial is saying is that essentially the opposite, that the cyclist knew he was going to be turning and that he had signaled, and that the cyclist decided to try and beat the turn anyway, which is analogous to a guy saying he decided to run a stop sign because he knew there was a cement mixer coming and he wanted to get hit by it. I mean, that's the problem I have with this. So I'm inclined to believe that in actual fact, either he didn't signal his turn, but the signal for some reason wasn't visible. Now, he never says he signaled his turn, but the way he describes the situation, what he does put in there, it's described in such a way as he thinks the cyclist is at fault. The question, I guess, is, was the cyclist really at fault? We don't know. But again, from how he describes it, if he had signaled the turn and it was clear to the cyclist that he was turning, even a cyclist who might be tempted to break rules wouldn't pass him on the inside because that's suicide. So I'm not 100% convinced that this guy has the right of the situation in terms of how he's describing it. But like I said, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, he actually did encounter an asshole cyclist, maybe somebody who was suicidal and didn't care if they got hit. So, because the only way the incident could be perceived as the cyclist's fault is if he had clearly signaled and telegraphed his turn. But again, if that's the case, nobody, even a potential rule breaker, would risk passing him on the inside of the turn. So I honestly don't, especially since this was a truck. He wasn't in a little Hyundai or something. He was in a ginormous SUV. So I honestly don't know, you know, to me, the way the guy describes the incident, it seems more like he didn't know there was a cyclist there, and he turned suddenly and basically cut the guy off. And that he then came to the conclusion, oh, he must be trying to pass me on the inside of my turn. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. But grant that maybe he's right, and for some unexplained reason, this cyclist decided to try and go in front of a clearly turning car that was in the act of making a signal turn. What happens then? Well, altercations, like I said, occur on the road all the time. It's unfortunate, but you have all these people traveling in all different ways, and there are altercations on the road. Here's the problem. If I have an altercation with another driver, my issue is what the other driver has done or what they think I have done. The issue isn't what kind of vehicle they're using. I mean, if a guy in a Volkswagen runs a red light and nearly hits me, and I'm run off the road into a ditch trying to avoid it, I don't sit there and say to myself, "Goddamn Volkswagens, they should be stricken from the roadways." No, I say to myself, that person's a jerk and he's breaking the laws, and oh my God, he nearly killed me. The focus isn't what kind of car he was driving. The focus is what he did with it, right? Just like if you have a guy who gets drunk and runs a stop sign and hits somebody and puts him in the hospital, or heaven forbid, kills him, the issue isn't what kind of whiskey he drank. Was it Jim Beam or was it Johnny Walker? We don't care. The point is that he's drunk. Doesn't matter what kind of beverage he consumed. The point is that it impaired his abilities. He got in the car knowing he was impaired, and he injured or killed somebody. So the issue isn't the brand or the type of thing. And again, back to the type of vehicle. If a guy's drunk on the road, whether he's in a car or a truck or a motorcycle or a bicycle, he's breaking the law. Now, obviously, a truck or a car poses more danger than a bicycle or even than a motorcycle. But the point is that nobody should be operating a vehicle of any kind on the street under the influence. So if somebody does get drunk, and let's say they're driving a Ford Expedition and they hit somebody, the issue isn't, just like it's not what kind of whiskey they drank, the issue isn't what kind of car they were driving. Whether it's a Ford Expedition or a Hyundai, it doesn't matter, right? The point is that they were drunk and they shouldn't have been behind the wheel. So if there's an altercation on the road between two drivers, the focus is never what type of vehicle the person is in. Usually the focus is on what the person did or was perceived to have done. Oh, you cut me off. Oh, you ran a stop sign. Oh, what did you do that for? Whatever. We've all seen this, right? Either we've been involved in one, or we've witnessed it, or we've heard from friends or family or acquaintances or coworkers or whatever that this has happened to someone. And the focus is always on what the person did or was perceived to have done. However, if the driver has an altercation with a bicyclist, the issue isn't what the person necessarily did or didn't do. It may start that way, but it very quickly moves to the fact that he's on a bike in the first place, which is kind of strange because cyclists have been around for over 120 years on the road in the United States. And if you're not capable of dealing with something that's been a fact of life and a fact of road use for over a century, you've got bigger problems than what someone else may or may not have done in a particular situation. But that's what happened. The column started out with this guy describing an altercation with what he was presenting as a careless cyclist passing him on the inside of his turn. It very quickly devolved into a denunciation of cycling in general. And then it went further. He didn't just say, well, some cyclists are rude or don't obey the rules, which would be a fair statement if a generalization, because there are rude people in every group and there are scofflaws in every group. Although, if you're going to talk about that, why not talk about the 30,000 people who are killed every year by car drivers? Again, most of those so-called accidents are actually crashes due to negligence or operator error. But the point is that what's good for the goose should be good for the gander in that sense. But okay, if you're going to say that group X, whether it's cyclists or drivers or whatever, has some rude or careless or asinine people in it, that's a fair statement. Every group has rude or asinine people in it. However, he then quickly moved on to denouncing cyclists' style choice, talking about the jerseys and the shorts and stuff like that. I don't know whether or not you think cycling shorts look silly, and there's differing opinions on this, obviously. The point is that they are comfortable on a long ride. I mean, if you're going to ride for 4 hours, you're probably better off not wearing jean cutoffs because you'll be walking like this for a week. Trust me, I know. But here's the thing. They're obviously functional or people wouldn't use them. Whether or not you think they look silly, what the heck what the heck does that have to do with whether or not the person did something wrong in a particular instance? For example, I could say that I think, people wearing backwards ball caps look silly. If you're going to wear a ball cap, the brim should be facing the right way. I could make the argument. However, if a person runs a stop sign and hits me wearing a backwards ball cap, the point isn't that he was wearing a backwards ball cap. The point is he ran a stop sign and hit me. I mean, come on. So, but he goes into this whole rant, and it's clear what upsets him isn't that this particular cyclist, in his mind, did something wrong, whether he did or not. It's clear that what upsets him is that there are cyclists on the roadways. So he starts denouncing their garb. He starts making derogatory comments about the helmets. And then he moves on to talking about how he wishes more of them would be killed. In particular, he describes, I think the phrase was, quote, more bodies wrapped in lycra and covered in lug wrench marks haven't been found in dumpsters. And he's expressing his disappointment at that. He then goes on to characterize cyclists on the streets as akin to unarmed Americans in Baghdad at dusk. And he ends by talking about cyclists' statements that they have a right to use the road as well. Sarcastically, yeah, right. All of the takeaway from this is that, whether or not in the particular incident that he described that set off this tirade, whether or not a particular cyclist did something wrong in that incident, it's clearly that this is a person that got out of bed in the morning and has for years been getting out of bed with a anti-cyclist vibe for whatever reason. So it could very well be that colored his perception of the incident. It could very well be, since he apparently doesn't believe cyclists should be on the road, that he wasn't even looking for one, and that, in fact, what happened is he started his turn while the cyclist was too close to stop, and rather than the cyclist passing him, he actually turned in front of the cyclist. But again, I'm not really so concerned with the particulars of the incident, because even if he's absolutely right and that particular cyclist was a jerk, how do you go from that to saying, I wish more cyclists would be killed? It's a very strange leap to go from a particular person has given me grief because of a situation that they caused by being careless to let's just kill everybody in that group. I mean, this is the kind of mentality that would not be socially acceptable on any other issue like that I can think of. Imagine if you had somebody just threatening violence against random people from some ethnic group or something. I mean, nobody would feel comfortable publishing that in a newspaper editorial in a major newspaper. The fact that this sort of thing, it's one thing to say, well, I don't like cyclists, or even that you hate them. But to go from that to, gee, I really wish people would murder more of them. What's this guy thinking? I honestly don't know, but apparently that's a socially acceptable thing. Now, one that makes me a little concerned, and obviously when I interact with drivers, it's going to be in the back of my mind that, there is this mentality out there. Is this person one of those individuals that, if I do get in an altercation with a driver, should I be prepared for the driver to maybe try and pull out a gun or a knife or something? I mean, what gives? Or maybe back up and try to run me over with his car. I mean, what, you know, when you have this kind of a mentality, uh, picture if you were, for example, a black man, and you were walking through a neighborhood where you knew there was a huge Ku Klux Klan presence. It's like a tongue twister. Ku Klux, whatever. The guys with the hoods and stuff, right? That used to do lynchings and whatnot. Um, you would be a little nervous, right? Because you know people in that neighborhood have an animosity towards you, and that they've acted in the past with that in violence. Now imagine that attitude extended to every street in the country because of this, sort of culturally acceptable animosity towards cyclists that tends to include violence. And it's worth noting it's not just in the United States. There was a famous one in the Times of London where a guy. Oops. There was a famous one in the Times of London where a guy published an editorial where he was talking about sabotaging the roadways in order to try and injure or kill cyclists. And the title of the editorial was "What's Smug and Needs to Be Decapitated." And the article, or the editorial rather, opened with the columnist using this sentence, quote, and I don't have it in front of me. This is totally from memory because this has been permanently burned into my brain, because it's not every day you read somebody in a major respectable newspaper. I mean, an editorialist writing in a newspaper in, Arizona is one thing, but the Times of London is a nationally renowned paper, okay, and internationally renowned, in fact. And yet here we have a columnist who opens with the sentence, quote, a festive custom we could do worse than foster is the stringing of piano wire along country lanes to decapitate cyclists, unquote. And he proceeds to go on this whole rant about how cyclists are awful and, blah, blah, blah. But when he tries to bring up specifics, he can't really think of anything. He describes them as having, quote, a brutish disregard for other road users, unquote, which is strange. I don't know how many cyclists go around killing people, whereas we do know car drivers kill a lot of folk. And obviously this guy, his sabotage would kill a lot of folk. Now, you could say maybe it's in jest, and maybe it is. Maybe he wasn't really planning to go out there and string, wires across roadways. But it's very clear that he shares the sentiment, even if he's not going to act on it. Yet when he tries to find some specific to bring up against cyclists, the only thing he can think of is that, well, some of them are littering energy bar wrappers as they ride past. Now, littering is bad, and anybody who's doing that is a jerk, and they shouldn't be doing that. But since when do you cut someone's head off for littering? I mean, seriously, are we living in like the Middle Ages or something? Now, again, you could say, well, it was just in jest. Maybe, but the point is that type of thing had actually been done in several instances in England prior to him publishing this editorial. There were, in fact, several cases where people were severely injured by wires strung across roadways by miscreants. And again, the point is whether he's actually intending to go out there and engage in this criminal violence is beside the point. The point is that he's using that as an example to talk about how much he hates cyclists. I don't think that the columnist actually intended to go out there and hurt anybody. However, I think he clearly wishes he could, or he wouldn't be using that as a subject of his so-called satire. And I'm not entirely sure. Since when does cutting off people's heads, why is that supposed to be funny? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But, then again, it was my head he was talking about cutting off. We got the Facebook pages that were in the news a while ago, a few years ago now, almost 5-10 years. But again, I saved the file. They were talking about how people didn't like cyclists, which is fine. If you want to get together on a forum and discuss, why you don't like a particular group of people, that's, in my opinion, it's kind of, like pointless. But if you want to do that, okay. However, where it crosses the line is when they start publishing open-ended threats to kill any cyclist they come across with their cars. At that point, you're making death threats, okay? And you're announcing your intention to disregard vehicle laws at a minimum. So why weren't these pages taken down? Well, Facebook apparently was informed that the people weren't just bitching about cyclists, but were actually discussing violence against them. But because they didn't target those threats at a particular individual, because they were open-ended threats to kill any cyclist they came across, Facebook decided that it wasn't a real threat. I'm sure that'll be a comfort to the next person who gets run down. But again, the thing is, this was a view that was out there, and while there were only a handful of people posting on this site, it had 31,000 fans. All right, 31,000 fans. So there's 31,000 people out there who don't just dislike cyclists, which is, if somebody dislikes cyclists, that's fine. I dislike things too. But I don't propose murdering people because they engage in an activity that I don't approve of. That's the difference, okay? I might think people who vote for Democrats or drink light beer are foolish, right? But I don't propose murdering them or running them over with my car. What's wrong with these people? I don't know. But it's not just a question of what's wrong with the handful of people that were posting on this on Facebook. It's a question of what's wrong with all the 31,000 people who are fans. And that's where you get into the real issue. It's not just that there's, an asinine person here and an asinine person there. It's that there's a widespread undercurrent, whenever you talk of cycling, of people who really do see the cyclist as that sort of disembodied inhuman other, and they're totally okay with killing them. You show people pictures of murder victims or accident victims in a car that's caught fire, or pictures of, refugees killed in a war zone, and they choke up and they get sad. You show the same people, some of them anyway, pictures of a dead cyclist on the ground, and a lot of them will start clapping. And if they don't actually start clapping, they'll sort of smile inwardly and then go home and post about how they were overjoyed to see the picture online. Now, it's very easy to say that, the online world has sort of a sense of anonymity, and it allows people to post things that they would never say face-to-face. That may be part of it. But it's not just the online world. You have this guy in this major newspaper, the Times of London, publishing this editorial with his name and his byline right at the top. I mean, he's not hiding behind the anonymity of an internet server or a chat room username. It's not like he's, posting this or publishing this under the name Dorkface263. His given name and his surname are right up there in the byline. So this is a big thing, unfortunately. And I think people, if you're not a cyclist, you're kind of oblivious to this. And you do have cases where people have acted on this. There was a guy in California who got angry that two cyclists were riding side by side on a county back road. Now, the vehicle law in New Jersey, which is similar to the law in most other states where it talks of cycling, says ride no more than two abreast while traffic is not impeded. While sometimes it's asinine to ride two across, other times it's perfectly fine. And in fact, there are sometimes safety reasons why you might do it. For example, if it's a road that has only sporadic car traffic, occasional car traffic, one, you're not obstructing car traffic to ride side by side and then move over back to single file when you do hear a car coming, because most of the time there's no car traffic. However, also, if it's a road that has sporadic car traffic but a high speed limit, riding two across presents twice the visual information to the eyes of the driver. He might miss a single cyclist. Two cyclists side by side are twice as wide. He's twice as likely to see them. And then, of course, when you hear him coming, you can move over to single file to let him by. But it's just more likely that he'll see you and won't plow right into you. Now, that said, there are sometimes people who ride two across just because they're jerks and they don't care they're holding somebody up. That's certainly true as well. But you can't just say, well, somebody's riding two across. They shouldn't do that. Well, actually, like a lot of things with road use, it depends on the circumstances. However, whether or not the cyclists were rude to have been riding to a cross in that particular instance, what the driver did was more than rude. He pulled in front of them and then deliberately slammed on his brakes, causing a guy's head to go through the back of his windshield. And apparently he had done something like this like a month or so before, and the police had been told, but they didn't do anything. After this second incident, the individual behind the wheel was actually charged with, it was like assault by auto or something, for deliberately, hitting people with his car because he thought they were being unsafe, or just rude. We're not sure exactly what his beef was. But here's the thing. This guy who did this with the car and put a guy's head through his windscreen, he was a physician. He was a doctor, for Pete's sake. All right? I mean, geez Louise, doctors take an oath not to harm people. And yet, boom, put a guy's head through the back of his car. Why? I can only think that in his mind, and again, I don't know what was going through this guy's head, except he obviously didn't like cyclists. Maybe he was one of those 30,000 fans at that Facebook page. We'll never know. But this wasn't the first time he did this. And, if he'd gotten caught by the police the last time when they were informed of this and they'd actually taken it seriously, these two people would never have been injured. However, the point is, why would a doctor, of all people, who takes an oath not to injure, deliberately try to kill somebody with his car? The only thing I can think of is that in his mind, because they were on bikes, they weren't somebody. Again, this, denunciation of cyclists as that sort of, that other, it's okay to do bad stuff to. Now, back to the issue of helmets. Why would somebody not wear helmets? Well, I personally wear a helmet all the time when I ride, and I think you should too. It's not perfect. It protects you against low-speed falls, so it's not going to protect you against a Humvee parking on top of you or a jaywalker running into you if you're traveling at speed, and it's not going to protect you either against a crazy homicidal physician deliberately slamming his car into you because he thinks you're a jerk. However, it will provide some protection against the secondary or tertiary impact with the ground, because a bicycle is balancing on two wheels. In any type of collision, whether you hit a post, whether you hit a car, or are hit by a car, or get knocked over by a person running into you, whatever, whether you hit a pothole, in any type of collision with a bicycle, there's always a secondary collision with the ground, because once your forward motion ceases, you're going to go over or be thrown over. So helmets do offer some protection, and I wear them. And in point of fact, it's not just a little extra protection just in case. It's also a place to mount lights and things like that there. So, I think that, helmets are good. Everybody should wear them. I don't think they should be forced to, though. Government mandates are funny. They usually don't do much to improve safety, and they usually have a lot of unintended consequences. Think all those airbags that kill little old ladies. First, they mandated we put airbags in the car, but they're no longer an option anymore. Then they realized that not everybody, they weren't good for everybody. So then they decided to mandate that a switch be installed so that the person has the option of turning it off. Well, okay, so why not just have left it as an option? Obviously, this was an unintended consequence they didn't foresee, so then they had to basically try and undo one mandate with another, etc. There's many more examples, on a variety of issues, but generally, one-size-fits-all government mandates aren't really that good. However, I'm certainly not against wearing helmets. Like I said, what started this discussion was I noticed this guy at work never wearing a helmet, and I'm like, well, why would he not do that? And when I thought about all the negative anti-cycling vibes, some of which specifically focused, like that article in Tucson, Arizona, on the appearance of cyclist equipment and how dorky it was and it makes you a target and all of that, and then the just general underlying vehemence against cyclists on the part of many people, which goes beyond what can be explained by the fact that a handful of people might have had a run-in with a handful of rude cyclists. I thought to myself, in a world where a lot of people seem willing to argue for the murder of cyclists, Is it any wonder that maybe a lot of novices or casual riders don't want to identify themselves as cyclists by, let's say, walking into work or walking into a store wearing a helmet, even if they did in fact ride there? Is it any wonder in a world where, you know, beyond the issue of the violence and the threats and all that BS, that there's just a general derision directed at cyclists, that you know, novices are going to be like, well, I don't want to wear a helmet, it looks dorky. Uh, Maybe, right? Now, if a person decides not to wear safety equipment that could even marginally improve their chances of surviving serious injury or brain damage, you know, not having serious injury or brain damage, in other words, it's not the smartest choice they made in their life. But it doesn't mean they're a dumbass. It just means they're human, okay? Humans are susceptible to peer pressure. It takes a strong will to be like, oh, I don't care if that person thinks I look like a dork. I'm going to do what I know is right or what I know is smart. You know, doing the right thing or the safe thing or the thing that's in your best interest when everybody and their brother are telling you that, you know, everything from that's not cool to it's going to make you a target. You know, there's people out there who want to kill you. Not everybody can make that leap. Now, it's different if you're, you know, an avid cyclist. Most avid cyclists wear helmets just because you spend that much time on the road. It's part of what you do. It's like zipping up your shorts after going to the bathroom. You don't have to think about it. But, you know, there's a lot of people out there, casual riders, people who don't consider themselves cyclists, even though they may ride a bike to get around occasionally. Like this gentleman at my work. I was like, I mentioned about the helmet and you know, and he goes, I'm not a serious cyclist. I'm not a roadie or anything. I just ride here and there. Okay. Now, of course, cyclist, technically all it means is person operating a bicycle. So you could say, is he a cyclist in that sense? Well, yes. But he clearly doesn't see himself as a cyclist. He doesn't see himself as a cyclist the way I do or some of the people I hang out with do. He, you know, that's just the way it is. And you know what? That's fine. It's his life. It's his, let him do whatever he's going to do. I don't particularly care. And, you know, I'm not preachy about helmets. I asked him why he didn't wear one. He's like, well, this is why. I'm like, okay, you know, I can sort of see that. But thinking about it later, why would he not consider himself a cyclist? Why would he not want to? Why would he shun that label? And as part of that, shun the identifying headgear, let's say, which has some marginal safety benefits, at least in low-speed falls or crashes. Well, think about it. If you're wearing a helmet, to the general public, you're an avid cyclist. What does that mean? You're one of those people that it's culturally acceptable to talk about murdering. Is it any wonder in an environment like that why a lot of casual and new riders might not want to wear helmets? It might not just be that they think it'll ruin their hairdo. That may be part of it. And if you know if that's your reason for not, again, wearing a helmet that could even marginally improve your chances of having an intact cerebellum after a fall, that's a pretty dumb choice. But why are they making that choice? Is it really because they think it's going to ruin their coiffure? Or is it because it has nothing to do with their hairdo and their perfectly coiffed bangs, and it has more to do with the fact that they don't want to be seen as a cyclist? And why wouldn't they? Well, look at the anti-cycling culture, okay? Some people, this is a target. And if you really want more bikers to wear helmets, more cyclists to wear helmets, and your goal really is protecting safety, then rather than blame the people for a car culture and an anti-cycling culture that they didn't create and really have nothing to do with, rather than blame them for maybe being affected by the peer pressure of that car culture or the, you know, the stuff that's in the media about cyclists being denounced and being, you know, well, they're the other, you know, nobody wants to be the other, right? Maybe we should address that rather than talking about helmet mandates and should there be a law saying